Greetings from Hong Kong, everyone. Welcome back and thank you for joining us. We have a favorite scene or a song that really moves us. We all have that. And a lot of us use these favorites for demonstrations. So we thought it would be an interesting topic to discuss how movie and music mixing engineers work to put that little magic in what we hear and what it is that they try to achieve when mixing movie and music content. So time for some introductions. We have our usual expert, John Calder, joining us again today. He is currently the Director of Retail at Acoustic Geometry, based in Minnesota, and he has 4 decades of experience as a musician, a recording engineer, audio post-production mixer, recording producer, and so on. And he has in fact earned gold and platinum records. We also have a new special guest, Gary Bourgeois. Gary is a noted re-recording mixer who has worked on films like Captain America, The Avengers, Hot Tub Machine, and he has also worked on many successful TV shows like S.W.A.T, Bull, and Timeless, and he won an Academy Award for sound. Is that right, Gary?
Close, not, but in that world, I worked on numerous pictures that did win Academy Awards. So yeah, it's a team effort, you know?
Yes, exactly.
All right. We also have Jeff Clark, Director from Software Engineering at Audyssey. He's based in LA, California. We have Glen Stone, VP of Systems Architecture at DT IMAX, that's Xperi. So good morning, gentlemen, and thank you very much again. We really appreciate you making time for us. I'm now going to hand it over to our host, Phil, and he joins us from his office in Carlsbad. Over to you, Phil.
Hey, everybody. It is great to see you again. So it's good to have this big group of creative people together in one location because all of us, I was a wannabe. I always was mesmerized by recording engineers and recording studios and things like that. And it's nice to be able to sit here and doing our conversations over the last few months, we realized that there's a lot of people who have been involved in content creation, from Glenn to John, and now Gary, and even Frederick. So we figured that this would be a great opportunity for us to talk about when people create content, what are they doing? What are they trying to achieve? And maybe give you some tips on things that you can do to improve your system to get more, to better realize what the creative artist intended for you to hear. We've done sessions on Dolby Atmos and DTSX and immersive stuff and how you have objects and stuff. And you can have hundreds of objects, but a lot of times it's like you can do too much with this. And if you try to use all these objects, yeah. So do you want to talk about that, Gary, about why you don't use all these things?
Anytime there's a new technology, people have to experiment and find out what's tasteful and what's right and what's wrong. And it's like having a 2-year-old at home. They're going to run into the coffee table every once in a while, and a lot of people overdo it. They misuse it, and then it doesn't do the artist or the director or whomever any favors by deflecting the focus in other places in the room. And to tell you the truth, even when I do big Dolby Atmos feature films, it takes a lot of tasteful sitting on your hands to not do stupid, wonderful things, and keep the focus on making us all feel a certain way, or feel something that we're supposed to be feeling, that the artist is telling us that he wants to come across to the audience.
So save the 140 effects for the battle scene in like Saving Private Ryan. Then you can have bullets and stuff whizzing all over the place, but you don't need that when you're on most things. Even if you're doing a car chase, I don't think you need 9,000 things whizzing around the room either, right?
Well, one of the worst things that we did in Quadraphonic had a lot of hardware made for it, and we used to have a quad panner. It was like a little joystick panner. I remember distinctly that you could swirl the sound around the room, and you could induce vomiting really pretty easily. And it was, you'd get some of these guys that would just go, "Hey, it's a swizzle stick," and they just go, stop. And so those things went away, fortunately, really quickly.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys for the audio. Then, sort of moving forward from today with this whole COVID thing, now we can't go to concerts as much as stuff. So let's say we do have a home setup with lots of speakers, including heights. But what I'm missing is going to a live theater or to an outdoor amphitheater and stuff. So what would you do for us to replicate that in my home if I do have these speakers?
The big venue.
We'd spill beer on your shoes. That would do it.
I can do that on my own. I got that covered. That's a great question.
I'm always amazed at how many people have multi-channel systems at home, and the setup is so bizarre. What they've done with choices and options, which they've had too many options or whatever, but and also acoustically, the setup is one speaker by a window, one speaker by the restroom, whatever. You go and you go, wow, this doesn't sound anything like what I mixed. And I'm watching on their television a film that I mixed, and I'm like, wow, this is a mess. What's going on? And a lot of people don't realize that when it works, and it works really well. You can listen to a concert from Austin City Limits or something like that, and you can feel like you're really there. But if your system is not tuned correctly or put together correctly, it's a joke. It's sad. It's a joke.
Yeah. And we were talking about that too, like some of the things. That's why Jeff is here to help with that, and that's John's main job, is to help with that as well. Because if your room and your system has an effect, Gary could spend his entire life, or how long does it take them to mix a movie normally? How long are you normally on a project?
Well, on an average, I would say on a big movie, if it's an action thing, at least 3 months.
Okay, so Gary spends 3 months working on something, and he with all this care, and then it gets to your house and blah, So that's why and that's why he gets so fired up sometimes. We had but 3 months could be longer than that, right? If you have to go back and do additional work, right? So.
Oh yeah, without a doubt, Yeah.
Now, how long does it take to mix does it take longer to mix a movie or a record?
Movie, definitely. Although the Neil Diamond album took 3 months of overdubs and mixing.
It takes definitely a movie for me, and I think a record is always a matter of the first tune or the first two tunes. Is when you're setting a style and you're setting your template up for how you're going to EQ or assign things, etc. But once your template is down and you have a sense of style for what this album or what this project is going to sound like, then the process speeds up a little bit, because you have a lot of basic stuff decided on.
A lot of it's a budget. I mean, how big a budget have you got, and how much time can you nitpick?
Yeah, because the question I have about it is, normally I was thinking the movie, when they mix a movie, the director and everybody kind of knows where they're going, what they want to do. They've already recorded the actor's dialogue. They already know what kind of scenes they're going to do. And I always hear those stories about the musicians going into a studio and not really knowing what they were going to make. They just buy a bunch of studio time, you know what I mean? And then they kind of have an idea. That's why I was wondering why it could take longer, because a lot of musicians may not have 100% in their head what they want yet, compared to a director that probably says, I want, this is my scene, and then you just have to figure out how you make the scene.
With an album project, you have quite often an artist whose voice is definitely to be heard, and a producer. With a feature film, there are so many variables, and quite often we start out with what's called a temp mix, where we're getting a feel, experimenting with different scenes and how we're going to approach it, what we're trying to say to the audience. And then we have screenings for basically dummy audiences that give us feedback as to whether we're going in the right direction. And then once we have that sort of template set up, the engineers, the sound people, etc., go nuts for like 2 or 3 months. back in with the picture out of there, and they sit there, and then you sort of refine and tweak and get it all right. But you want to make sure that you're getting the audience to listen to what the director wanted. In the music end of things, I find it's just a lot easier. You're working with one artist usually. Quite often, I'm the producer along with the artist, so it's just the two of us working together. Quite often, they are in another city, in Nashville or New York or whatever. They send me tracks. I do a mix, and then we get together, and then we like fine tune and have arguments.
Yeah.
Music is a lamination project, much like movies. Movie lamination is more vertical. You've got film, you've got effects, you've got all kinds of different silos. In music, it's basically a horizontal lamination. You're putting together drums and bass and guitars and pianos and orchestras and whatever else you've got, and you're trying to make, by laminating it all and deciding on this sound or that sound, you're trying to make basically one thing. It's the same thing with a movie. You're trying to make one experience. If somebody says, "Wow, that was a great sound effect," or "Wow, listen to that snare drum," you've failed kind of, because nobody wants
it's
to.
It's called silent art.
Yeah,
exactly. It's called
you're really cooking something so that you have one thing at the end. You have a song, and every decision in a record needs to be made around the song. The song is the driver, regardless of who the personality that's the champion for the song. It can be the songwriter, it can be the producer, it can be the singer, whoever. You're still trying to make the song as good as you can possibly make it, and those decisions are all lining up with the song. In a movie, it's the same.
If I may jump in just for a second, one of the crucial differences here is, and a lot of people don't see this, but in the music industry, the music is, generally speaking, 99% of the time recorded in a controlled environment. Either great musicians, great musical instruments, but quite often recorded in a studio where it's a controlled environment. In the film industry, the only thing that comes to us from a controlled environment is the music. It comes from the studio, right? But the rest of it, everything else, the backgrounds, the hard effects, which is like the car driving by and the gunshots and all that sort of stuff, they're all either being recorded by the sound effects people or come from libraries or whatever. The backgrounds, the production mix is wildly recorded at the best somebody can, but it's not in the studio environment. It's in New York City out on the street, and I got to try and make it work and have it sit into place. Where the big challenge is quite often taking disparate elements that are not from controlled environments, putting them together and having nobody notice that they're all disparate.
So let's talk about controlled environment, because I was just going in and grabbing photographs of studios. And as I was going through and I was looking at all of these studios, from John's Lava Rock 1980 studio to some of these modern studios, they all look different, So do they all sound different? Because I'm thinking that you start mixing something in New York, and then you end up, hey, can you come and finish it in Tennessee? And then you go to this other studio and it sounds completely different.
That's the art.
So what's up with that?
Being a recording engineer that works in one studio has an advantage, but being a recording engineer that goes to a lot of different studios also has an advantage. It really just depends on how people work. I see we have the dreaded NS10s in the middle of the.
We're going to talk about that in a second. We're going to get there.
But really, what a lot of gigging engineers have done is make a little collection of equipment. They have their own active monitors that they bring with them. They know those monitors really well. They've mixed thousands of hours on those things. They've got their own rack of equalizers and compressors, and in a lot of cases, their own microphone collection. So you bring some of it with you. You pop into a bunch of different rooms. It's not dissimilar to setting up somebody's surround system in a living room you've never been in. You just kind of go, okay, I can guess how this should sound. How does it sound? Okay, I'll adjust.
Mhm. Exactly. And it's almost like because I look at 2-channel, Jeff can kind of give you just make sure that the frequency response is smooth and even and the timing is correct, but each speaker has its own, it's not going to take away a speaker's dispersion characteristics or its physical, its character. So each room is still going to, even once they're calibrated, Jeff, they're probably going to still sound slightly different just because of the
Yeah,
characteristics of the speakers, right?
yeah, that's absolutely right. And there are components of the EQ process that don't quite capture that.
Hmm.
Where somebody who's trained can make some tweaks to the EQ and improve it beyond what the measurements tell you all by themselves. So even if you're looking at a measurement,
Hmm.
you can't tell the whole story from that.
Exactly.
That's right.
So, I mean, you're just trying to convey what the warmth of the singer, the
We can
this
we can fix
character.
tonal balance. We can fix what's getting to your ears is tonally balanced.
Mhm.
We and to some degree, some of the phase effects can be EQ'd out or will EQ out as a nature of how they're created.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. But
but
I've heard,
there's the directivity of a cone is the directivity of a cone, and
yeah.
there are all different
I
size
must,
cones and speakers.
Mhm. Go ahead,
if I
Gary.
must, I'd like to mention that the difference between music studios, even all the high-end ones, the differences are wider than a lot of the film mixing studios because we
Mhm.
have a reference point and a standard that the Adobe engineers, whatnot, pick these rooms. I mixed in different countries, and the last thing I mixed in Moscow, that's the theater right now that you're showing that's in Moscow. That's a big Dolby Atmos room right there that I
That is
mixed in
awesome.
with. It's an awesome room. Sounds really good, but you know what? I got to tell you that there was an Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jackie Chan action adventure thing for the Russians and the
Mhm.
Chinese. Anyway, the thing is now it's like uh, I show up with a hard drive. It's my boot drive
Mhm.
and um, my iLock, and I say, here you go, jam it in, shove it in, and boom, I sit at the board and flap, it all comes up. It's all my plugins and all that sort of stuff. That's what
Mhm.
happened in that room. And but the thing is that I also bring just like a pair of near field monitors that I know really well. And
Mhm.
before we start anything, I want to hear some material up
Mhm.
on the main speakers, and then I
Mhm.
want to hear them on my near fields and go,
Mhm.
oh yeah, okay, that's translating well. We're in the ballpark. We're well within the ballpark. It sounds really good. We're off and
Mhm.
running, and off we go. And
Mhm.
there's a certain assurance there that you know where you're getting. I found that in the music studios, personally, that it was more important that I trust the near fields that I bring along with me, or the headphones, or whatever it is, that I can say, oh, okay, this is what I've got. It's completely different.
Yeah. So the theater, so you're saying
Yeah.
these big multi-channel theater systems, because of the studios have a lot, and probably DTS too probably has a lot of defined criteria. Um,
Yeah.
you can kind of, whether you're going from space to space to space, you can get a more unified sound. Now, the reason why I bring this up is people go to us and they say, they go to, why did my Audyssey turn this down? And why, because the Audyssey says, based on, it was mixed this way, it sounded this way in this studio, this way in this studio, this way in this studio. And if you want it to sound like that in your house, I have to turn that speaker down. You may want it up, but we always say there's perfection and there's preference. So you may prefer more surrounds behind you, but Gary may not have wanted you to have that much output behind you. And that's the hard thing. I'm tempted that after I do, and I'm sure Jim and I have both done it, is after we Odyssey it and Jeff Sting has done the whole thing, we go over there to the bass knob, kick it up a little bit, go to the surrounds, turn it up a little bit, just because, even though just because, it's a preference thing. So we're talking about the fact that we want this consistency. And now a lot of times
Yeah.
people see these big studios and they go, I don't have the ability to put that theater in my house, or those big power Genelacs or whatever those are that cost the price of a house in Texas. But
I think those are Augsburgers, actually.
yeah, a lot of times though, how much are those speakers, by the way? Thousands and thousands, and those ones on the wall are probably a pretty penny right here.
I think those are probably around 12 grand for
Yeah.
the pair with
Yeah.
some guidance, some electronic guidance. It doesn't include the power amps.
Yeah. So, but I noticed that a lot of times Gary was talking about he has his near field monitors, and we'll talk about near field mixes versus the traditional like a cinema mix in a second as we get, and that'll lead us into IMAX. But they also want to point out here in these pictures that you always see these little speakers right here that makes every engineer cringe. What are those, you guys?
Gary and I agree on this. When I worked for Yamaha, we used to joke about that marvelous white cone technology. Those speakers are called NS10s, and they're passive.
Yes.
And they have a woofer and a tweeter. And you'll see them often with a piece of Kleenex taped over the tweeter. For some guys, mostly the metal guys will tape some kind of tissue paper over the tweeter,
Right.
because they want to. One of the problems with monitor speakers is if you don't have any bass in those monitors, then you're going to add too much bass. If you have too much treble, you're going to turn the treble down. And so not only should your monitors be smooth and more or less as flat as you can make them, but they also need to reflect the kind of music you're doing. And so you do see NS10s in heavy metal studios. A lot of hip hop rap guys will haul around NS10s, and I just personally hate them. But some guys have made brilliant albums using only NS10s. It amazes me, but there's geniuses out there that can work with anything. So I don't know. I don't know how you could mix in those things. I can't.
It was good points about the Yamaha NS, and I hate them also. But the whole point is, I think you would do 98% of your mix on the large ones, on some other good near fields, et cetera, but you would do your last playback on the Yamahas and say, is it working? Is there one little thing that I need to tweak or do, whatever? But ultimately, you're not doing a whole lot rough, shoddy speakers.
Yeah, it's just to make sure that you're not hurting those little speakers is basically what you're doing.
Actually, it depends on the technique you use. I never did a full mix on the big soffit speakers. Those were just way too exaggerated, and it was probably that we were dealing with the wooden lips dual 15s paradigm. They were really liars. They tell you had this fabulous mix, and then you get it down in your Oratones or your two-way speakers. They're the little, an 8-inch and a tweeter, and it just was nothing there. And what a lot of guys, I'm not alone in this. A lot of guys would use the soffits, the big speakers, to play back for the band and blow their ears off, and this is great.
Impress them so they'll sign off on the record, right?
Yeah, sounds great, guys. Go out and do a better take, but yeah, we got the sound. And then when you're actually mixing in the band, don't let the bass player near the bass fader, by the way. When the band is gone and you're actually mixing, a lot of guys will go to not a near field, but a sort of a midfield, nice two-way in some cases. And so then you've also got Oratones, these little 4-inch one-way speakers for car radios or for whatever. And it's changed a little bit over the years, but that 3 setup thing, loud for impressing people, a trustworthy two-way or a powered monitor near field or a midfield, and then the little bitty, whatever your crap reference is.
You have a director come in and the pitch editor or whatever, you never play on the near fields. I mean, they want to hear it like big. And I remember once I remember I told that director, I said, this was like one of the Michael Bay, what do you call it? Transformers. And I said, it's never going to sound like this again anywhere else. And he goes, you think that I'm going to go buy a ticket and see my own film? Screw it. He said, I just want to hear it from the big speakers, and that's all I want to hear.
That's funny.
There's something else that I would like you guys to talk about, John and Gary both. Different genres require a different mix. We were talking about that a little earlier, and to my mind, I would just think you would always want it to sound as good as possible because I want to hear it as good as possible. And yet, I think, John, you said, well, you wouldn't mix a jazz record the same way you would mix a country record. And I went, ah. And Gary, I think you said that you mix movies based on content. So a romantic comedy has a very different mix than
Yep.
a horror movie or whatever. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
You know, it basically, a lot of it comes down to what is the content, how thick, how deep is that content, who is it intended for? The old Rolling Stones smiley curve. They found out that a lot of their fans would turn the bass up all the way and the treble up all the way. So in mastering, they'd turn the treble and the bass down a little bit so it'd be kind of flat. But those days are kind of gone, thankfully. You really are mixing, as I said earlier, you're mixing the song. So if you're doing a Beethoven symphony, you're doing the 7th Symphony, you really aren't mixing per se, as you're just trying to restrict the dynamic range enough that it'll fit on the media or the streaming service you're going to be broadcasting on. And it's kind of the same way. If you're still selling CDs, there's a dynamic range for that. And so within that dynamic range, you have to fit your content. So if you've got 3 guitarists and 2 bass players and 3 drummers and 8 singers, your mix is going to be different than if you've got a jazz trio. It's not that you're not trying to make it good. You're trying to make it good for the content and who's listening. So a lot of it has to do with how much are you limiting? What are you EQing? Are you rolling off the low end on some of the instruments? Rock and roll is a totally different animal than jazz, and you're going to do different things to the instruments. You're still going to limit, you're still going to EQ, you're still maybe add artificial reverberation. You're going to create a scene because you're not really representing reality. You're creating reality, a new reality, and that's what you're mixing toward.
I must say that on films, all the different styles, it's exactly the same as what John just said, because the elements that you're given to work with are different. A rock and roll band, the way they play their guitars and their biting, and it's very different than a full-time orchestra. So you're just trying to maximize what you've got to work with. If I'm working on a big action picture, it's like the Transformers pictures or whatever, that there's whole scenes that there's no dialogue. And if there is dialogue, they're going to be yelling their ass off because it's just so much going on, right? And so to approach that, you say, how can I maximize all this noise? How can I create holes for this to attack or this? There's even like, for instance, techniques where you drop out a whole lot of sound for like literally 1 frame before an explosion or a big shot, so that the ear is set up to get that impact of that impulse, right? Well, obviously, with a romantic comedy, you're not in that sort of a league. Or if you're in a drama, I have to be really careful about how I play the backgrounds. And if the dog off stage goes woof woof just right before somebody says I love you, it's like, get the fuck that dog out. Get that dog out of there. And, sorry, it's like they're different animals. You're as you say, an orchestra and rock and roll or blues or country, they're different animals because you're given different types of elements to work with. You're maximizing what you're trying to communicate to the audience.
Yeah. The other thing, Gary, can you talk about mixing for different cultures? Because I thought that was pretty fascinating too. About there's the almost like the American mix, and then the European mix, and then
It's less. I mean, the like English mix, American mix, very similar. But when you go to a lot of countries that have only ever heard American, for a long time, up until the last decade, I'd say. A lot of those countries only ever heard what's called dubbed versions. And the dubbed versions were just taking what's called the M&E, the music and effects track, which is a full mix with with just the dialogue taken out, right? Mm-hmm. And they would quite often just pull that down, literally 8 or 9 dB, and then just put in the dubbed version, the Chinese or really loud and flat and right in front, no perspective, no rooms, nothing, right? Now, in the last 10 years with digital and with, you know, earbuds and the young kids and whatnot, they're listening to American mixes. They want, from their own culture, their own filmmaking, they want them to replicate American mixes more. Mm-hmm. Consequently, there's more American mixers going to foreign countries mm-hmm. to ply their trade the way they hope they want to get an American mix. Mm-hmm. The problem here is when you get a producer and or a director that are in their 60s or older, and all they're used to is the dubbed version. And so you give them an American mix, so really like it's all around you, it's all happening, the flames are going over, blah, all this sort of stuff. And they're going, no, bring it all down, bring it all down. Put the dialogue right in my face like this, okay? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So it's like turning the ship around in the living room, as they say. It's culturally, it's an education, and the younger people in those countries are starting to demand, and with that, hopefully things will change and get better, so that there's a better sensibility of what can be said by the soundtrack.
I was hired by a producer I'd worked with in Los Angeles. I was living in Paris, and he said, "Oh, you're living in Paris. Why don't you come to Milan and mix an album for me?" And they hired me because I was the quote unquote LA engineer. And right. I'd done a Neil Diamond album, and they wanted me to mix the Italian Neil Diamond. And so I went there, and the La Scala orchestra strings sounded brilliant. The vocal was brilliant. The drums, bass, guitar, and piano were horrible. And so they wanted their drums, bass, guitar, and piano to sound like an LA recording. And it was a bit of a stretch. And their engineers were in white lab coats, and it was a really interesting experience. And their patch bay, instead of having ins and outs separated, they had in and out in the same octal cable. And so I said, well, I want to go into a limiter, and then I want to go into this EQ. And they said, no, we can't do that. Well, why not? Well, you showed me the cable. I said, well, just splice it so I can do that. And they looked at each other with this panic. And the producer, Gian Piero Reverberi, great name for a music producer, said, go do it. We'll have lunch. We'll come back. You'll have the cable done. So they boffins, as they say in England, went it back. And then I had my cable. I had a compressor, and then I had an EQ. And they're writing notes off on the side. It was really a weird cultural thing. And again, didn't have to touch the strings, didn't have to touch the vocal, but everything else was bleh.
You know, when I was at Sony for like 10 years and doing a lot of their big productions and whatnot, and they had teams of sound engineers from like South Korea would come over, Japan would come over, and they would literally sit for, you're gonna love this story, sorry, but they would sit for like a week, and they would watch everything that I'm doing, and they would be taking notes, really copious notes, right? And I kept thinking to myself, what the hell are they doing? Why are they doing this, right? So at the end of the week, they would, oh, thank you very much, thank you very much. And they would all leave. And then after a number of years, you got used to the routine. Mm-hmm. And what would happen was you would get one representative come back mm-hmm. and say, they take you aside and say, please, tell us secret. What is secret, right? And I kept thinking to myself, I would say, there's no secret. You saw what I did. And they would be totally disappointed. And they would literally think that I wasn't going to give away the secret. And they would walk off angry. And I realized at a certain point that I have to tell them the secret. And so what I did eventually, I said, you want to know the secret? Yes. You know, it's like, okay, I'll tell you what the secret is. I said, everything that you wrote down doesn't mean squat. None of it. I said, every time I hear something, I to it, I assess it's new every time. I said, when I hit the kick drum and it punches my chest and it makes my chest, I said, I got to make it work. I got to make it work. I said, but to tell you the truth, the secret is if it doesn't come from the heart, if it comes from the head, it's no good. If it comes from the heart, that's everything. That's the secret. And they would look at me completely dumbfounded because all they wanted was formulas, right? They would walk away dumbfounded. At least I gave them the secret.
Excellent.
Phil, are you up for a couple of questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Fire away.
What is the difference between near field speakers and others? I think that's a pretty good question.
That leads us to, and yeah, because this is a far field system right here. Okay, talk about, and then let's talk about, so near field, far field. Gary, why don't you take that? Because that's a good conversation.
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, when what you're looking at now is a huge Dolby Atmos theatrical mix stage. Actually, this one is in Moscow, Russia, where I mixed a big Arnold Schwarzenegger picture just a little while ago. But the speaker systems, near field, midfield, and far field, the situation is that the format is such that it's going to be playing in a theatrical environment. So you're going to be listening to your mix on the far field system. But to tell you the truth, even during the mix, quite often we refer to the near field speakers just to know how the internal mix is working, if we can refine it, and then if we do make adjustments to refine it, then we pop it back up on the far field mains, and it usually translates great.
Now, one thing that's kind of interesting, and I'll bring in Glenn for this one, is most of the time like you said, you make two mixes of the near, like maybe a big theatrical, big room, big super dynamics. The room is like gigantic mix, and then you do one that's more that will basically translate in the average listening room. But some people want the gigantic, and that's where Glenn's company Xperi comes in. And how are you offering the customer the option of having the gigantic, Glenn?
Well, yeah, just to back up a half a second. So I think what you're talking about is when they take that theatrical mix and print it down to Blu-ray or streaming, then that usually that mix is mixed in what we call near field, and there's some advantages to that. But there's some things that happen in that near field mix, like they may compress it a little bit and whatnot. So one of the things about IMAX movies is they are intended to be heard as a far field mix in the theater. And so what we did is we worked with IMAX to bring that mix down into the consumer's home. So as part of the IMAX enhanced experience for in the home, you're encouraged to buy big speakers and place them in the front and at the back and whatnot to get that replication of the far field mix as best you can in your consumer's home, as you would in the theater.
Yeah. So you have, but the big thing that I want to bring up is you have options. Before, as a consumer, you would get one option of a movie, but if I went to a cinema, an AMC cinema, I could see a movie in Dolby in the AMC Prime Theater in Dolby Atmos and DTS and Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. I could see it in IMAX in the IMAX theater in the big IMAX 12 theater, and I could see it in DTS with with a 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio. 3 different experiences in one cinema of the Avengers. But then when I go home, I had only one option. And now you have, I think, things like IMAX Enhance, at least is giving you another option. Which one do you like? That's up to you. But just like when you go into the movie theater, which ticket you're going to buy, that's up to you. Gary goes out and makes these multiple versions of it, and then for those particular spaces, and you pick the one that you like, just like I'm sure there's 9 different versions of the Neil Diamond thing that John's done, the 79 remaster and the 85 remaster and the 96 remaster, and you buy the one that you like. The goal is to give you the best performance that they can at that particular time, and you choose what you want. So now you have options as a customer.
The term near field, far field, midfield, those are all acoustical terms. A near field speaker is functioning within a few feet of your ear. And so the sound field changes when the source is much closer to your head. Headphones are very near field. And so midfield really, usually in a recording studio situation, refers to speakers on a stand, not on the console meter bridge. They're usually a couple of feet past the meter bridge, and acoustically they're better because the console itself is a big reflector. And so far field is they're as far away as it can get in the room. They're at the room boundaries, and it's a huge room. And so it really is more a reference to the size of the room as often as not. And the reason you're using different speakers to monitor is pretty much that in the near field, you can hear some things a lot better than in the far field. And you're sort of preparing to make sure that it sounds good really close and really far. And so you're making those compromises based on the acoustical space that'll be listened in, as well as the quality of the speakers.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question too. You talk about this difference in spaces. One thing that differences in spaces have a big impact on is bass. Because how long is those big? You always talk about, John. How long is like a lower string on a guitar? How long is that particular note? You know,
the low E string on an electric bass is about 27 feet, 40 hertz.
Exactly.
It's about 27 feet, and that's this room on the screen right now is way past 27 feet in any dimension.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
But,
so the
yeah,
way that bass, so the way that bass is generated and plays in a massive room, or like Jim says, he's chasing that drum test at an open air theater, like an open air arena. You know, he can't get that sound. You know, but that's the difference between the full wave actually being formed, you know, or the pressure that is the pressure-based bass that a regular room in a home makes. And so a lot of times bass translates different in these two spaces as well. Do you guys agree with that?
One thing I want to add to that, as you're talking about this, and especially like this picture, and if you go to a lot of theaters, there'll be a lot of speakers along the sides of the walls because they use arrays to fill in. You go to, for example, though, when you go to an IMAX speaker, you don't see any of that. They literally only either got 5 or 12 speakers. They're all, of course, full range. And back to John's point about, you know, then the acoustic effects of those speakers being further away and how you hear that, which is interesting though, because consumers' homes don't have phased arrays really either. And so it's nice to have just, you know, a simple mix that just targets certain speakers and then the mixers work with that.
Exactly. The next thing, these things are full range. Everything is full range. The center has a subwoofer. Okay, that's normally not the normal way that it's done in a home, right? The next thing is the way this room makes its bass. So the way bass sounds here is it trying to translate that at home from a massive room to an itty bitty room is going to change it. The change, like John said, from near field, from this big, huge far field mix to a near field mix. So there's a lot of things these guys have to think about as they translate these movies from these big venues. Or, like I said, I guess John, if you guys are mixing, doing a recording of Hampton Live, you know, like some big live concert, you know, Metallica Live, you know, trying to take that mix, you know, and then making it sound like, to give you that power and impact on a CD is kind of difficult too, because you're taking it from some massive arena, you know, the way it's supposed to sound in a massive arena, and trying to get that same impression in my little office here could be a challenge.
Neil Brody and I, who did the Neil Diamond album together, that Gary knows, we also worked on a project by the band. It was the King Biscuit Flower Hour, and it was a live recording of their concert. I can't remember the city they were in. And so we actually, it was my 2 goals when I moved to LA was to get a gold record and work with the band. So I got the gold record, worked with the band, but the band was an amazing outfit. But we mixed that at their studio in the Shangri-La studio out in Zuma Beach, California. And there's 2 things that happen with live live mixes. One is the performances are usually pretty good instrumentally, but vocally, they, back in those days, mid-70s, they couldn't hear themselves at all. Stage monitors were terrible. They'd feedback, they'd turn them down. They were pretty much guessing at their vocal parts a lot of the time. So the members of the band were down in their studio and we were replacing a couple of little bits and pieces where their harmonies weren't quite accurate, or it was distorted from the front of house board mix, things like that. So we had a 16-track tape and we just replaced a couple of vocal parts and then mixed it for FM radio, which is where King Biscuit Flour Hour was. And, you know, it was really telling because the microphones used in live sound are often quite different than the ones used in a recording studio. And so what you're doing when you're taking live mixes, unless you've double mic'd everything, which a lot of folks get a chance to do, you're dealing with mics that sound good on a PA system, but don't really sound very good in a recording studio. And so you're EQing and compressing and dipping things a lot just to make it work. But curiously, the sound of the instruments is very similar. The instruments aren't necessarily in a big room because the mic is 2 inches from the grill cloth. So, you know, really what you're dealing with is you may have a couple of mics out in the house for the audience response, and you will bring those up on occasion where there's cheering or whatever. But normally, when you talk about near and far field, all the microphones for live concert recording are super near field. They're right next to the sound source.
Actually, I wanted to point one thing out in terms of the video world with audio. One of the largest consumer complaints is they'll watch a movie on their TV, not go to a nice system, you know, and they can't hear the dialogue. And what's interesting about that is because the dialogue, when you guys mix it, you know, you're giving yourself a center channel, but TVs don't have that center channel, and it has this down mix, and then they go off by 3 dBs for the left and right speakers, and the older generation at least are having a hard time hearing the voice channel in these mixes that are intended to have a center channel speaker.
Everything's lumped together, and it just makes it too hard to pick out.
I mean, that's such a
lose
problem
the
that
audio on the left and right. But when we talk about trying to do sort of some sound processing to fix that, then the creatives get all annoyed. Don't touch our mix. Can't win.
Well, on the flip side, there is a technology solution for it, and I mean, so Audyssey's worked with some TV manufacturers with one of our technologies we call Vocal Boost, and it's just for exactly that purpose of getting the mixes to sound good on a TV. And we're especially focused on movie sounds as a company. I shouldn't say that, not over music, but over just things that were designed to be heard on a TV. So, and it worked.
Well, it's also one of the reasons why we were talking earlier about doing different versions for different applications. Even when we do a near field mix of a theatrical that I just finished mixing, and I do a near field mix, but I also thereafter do just a 2-track left-right mix that we double check, because the download, the automatic download, does not necessarily make the dialogue come forward enough. And so that's why we do those different versions of the mix.
Yeah, actually, that's a good tip. If you are sadly just going to watch your movie on TV from a streaming service, you can tell the TV to basically only take 2-channel audio, and you might get your better mix then, as opposed to getting, say, a 5.1 or something, which assumes a center channel.
So right. This leads us to another conversation. People say, well, I went out and bought, a 9.1.6 and nothing's coming out the back. And that's because sometimes just because you have all the tools and you have 100 and something objects you can whiz around the room, Gary and John may not want to do that. So can you talk about why you don't, just because you have all of these different effects and all these different speakers, you don't use them, Gary, all the time?
No, absolutely not. I think with any new technology, when it first came out, the tendency in any new technology is to overuse it because you haven't learned what a tasteful consideration you're dealing with. So definitely when Atmos first came out, it was just like all around you and it was happening so much, and it actually took you out of the story. We've learned over the years that putting something in the objects tracks up above in the ceiling or moving it around the back or whatever has to be really chosen carefully. It has to deal with taste and intention. And the intention should be to tell the story, that the director is wanting the audience to understand and hear. And if we can immerse people in the whole sensibility of the soundtrack, nice. But if we pull them out of the story, if we pull them off of the screen unintentionally, then we screwed up. And if you're looking for stuff always to be whizzing around, whatnot, we stopped doing those things sort of willy-nilly, and we started doing them with purpose. And now I think the translation is working much better. We're communicating with the audiences better, and we're not just flooding them with massive amounts of smear.
Exactly, and that works for DTS-X as well, or as well as Atmos, or even Dolby Dolby Digital, as well as DTS. I remember when the first mixes come out, you were saying you'd be watching a movie and be like, "Man, that's awesome! What just happened?" You know, man, I can hear a bird over there. Did you see the guy? You know, didn't you hear that he confessed? Huh? What? You know, you were so into the cool effects that, like you said, Gary, it took you out of the director's and the director's intent for what he was trying to do. So yeah, they're there, but don't expect to hear birds farting all the time in the background when they're trying to do a love story and this guy is proposing to his wife. Okay, yes, all those channels are there, but it doesn't mean he's going to use them all the time. So don't call me saying, "Hey, I bought this big system and I'm watching Terms of Endearment and nothing's flying around in the back." It's not supposed to. Okay, so keep that in mind.
I have a question about this, and you know, you did the earlier webinar, and I kept quiet at this. Now I'm going to ask a question, and I know I'm going to get the wrath of the mixers on me. But for those movies that don't have any immersive content or whatnot, you know, the companies now, all these companies make up mixers that'll make use of those speakers. One of the things in the consumer home is they paid to have those speakers. They want sound coming out of them. You know, so I will turn it on for movies. And what it does, it just gives a filling effect. You know, it doesn't really put much up there, but, you know, it does, when a plane flies over your head, it does feel like something's happening. What is your guys' opinions on that? So I'm referring to, in my case, Neuralux is an up mixer made by DTS, but, you know, to be fair, Dolby makes one, so everybody makes one.
If I may, sorry, John, I'll just go on this one right away, but quite often there's a lot going on that you're unaware of because it's done subtly, but it's done with intentionally. And that is, for instance, the background tracks there's background tracks for every scene, every frame of a film. There's background tracks, there's living room atmosphere, there's you know, wind and trees, there's lake water lap, whatever it is, those are background tracks. That's the soup that we sit in. And that's in all of the channels in a sort of a multi-format, but it's all happening all the time. The things that people notice are the things that are percussive, or the things that stick out, that are intentional. And they say, oh, now I hear my surround working. But in actual fact, they're working all the time. They're always there. For instance, I'll have a director say, why don't I hear things all around me? And I'll switch the surrounds off and everything goes flat, whap to the front. And they go, oh my God, I had no idea all that was going on. It's like, yeah, I'm sitting you in the soup that I want you, immersing you in the film that I want you, in the atmosphere that I want you to be in. But you're not supposed to be like completely aware of that all the time. I want you to be in that experience, but I don't want you to be distracted by it.
Well, the same is true for music. You know, when you're mixing two-channel stereo, there's a lot. Stereo is basically difference. Stereo exists because the two channels have something different in them, and it may be simply a phase-based coherent microphone setup, a little hall reverb, or a little whatever for a concert, or in a pop record, they're panning guitars around or doing a little delay of a mono channel on the other side. There was an experiment years ago that Dynaco put out which took a little speaker and wired it across the two positive terminals of the power amplifier. And they put it in the back. And basically what it did was it gave you the difference between the two channels. It wouldn't give you the bass and the drums and the vocal and all the stuff you'd placed, you know, in your phantom center channel. It was all the different stuff. And so you get reverbs and you get a little of this and a little of that. It was surprisingly effective. It was just basically a speaker and a wire that you strapped across the two output power amp channels. And so when you get music in these surround systems, a lot of times, especially classical or jazz, you're just going to get hall ambience. You're going to get something that was put there to make it feel more live or was added in from the hall. And again, if you turn off the surrounds, suddenly the music collapses to the front. It's just not as interesting, but you shouldn't really be aware that there's stuff placed there unless somebody wants you to hear that effect. And that's and the other thing we haven't really talked about is there's really good mixers like Gary, and there's guys that mix movies badly.
Yes.
And the dialogue's down and the explosions are up, and you're never going to hear what's going on the right way. So, you know, it's everybody has a different way of doing things.
In a lot of instances, the both the director and even the mixer don't want to diffuse the attention of the audience. They want to keep them focused on the action on the picture. Quite often it'll surround the room because we'll use the 7.1 all around us, but the objects we try to, especially in a non-action film, we try to limit the amount that goes up there and distracts us and pulls us out of the picture. You don't want to fly going by on the ceiling and take everybody out of the picture. That's basically
right. The actor's talking and there's a fly flying around back.
The whole well, in The Fly, it would be appropriate. The whole purpose of the audio, right, is to enhance the experience of the picture. Right? Whether it be scary, happy, sad, whatever, anxious, exciting. That's the whole purpose of the audio, is to suck you into that screen even more. Right?
Yeah, it's not meant to be a circus in your living room, you know.
There are some directors and producers that only want basically the horizontal. You know, Dunkirk, for example, was all horizontal.
Well,
Gary, you were saying something about Woody Allen?
Yeah, Woody Allen mixes all this stuff in mono.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, when it comes to music being used in movies with that sense of space, there's a couple that stood out to me that I've heard modern. The first one is there's two demos that we've been using at trade shows. Well, one of them, Jim we can't do because this is too emotional. The one that we do a lot is From the Greatest Showman, Never Enough. It starts off with the lady singing. And it's like when P.T. Barnum brings her from Sweden and no one in America has heard it. And everybody thinks he's going to be a joke. And it starts off with just her singing. And then they just keep adding the layers of the orchestra and she gets bigger and bigger. And it really shows how that it's immersive, but it never takes you away from her voice in the middle. It's every speaker in your 13 channel system is running. But as it gets bigger and bigger, you just focus more and more on her and him. The other one that's really good is from a movie called Across the Universe. It's a Beatles one, and it's called it's a version of Let It Be, and it starts off with a kid at a riot, a black kid in a riot, and a bunch of military people knocking on the door to tell a parent that her son has passed away. And then it just grows from the single kid singing into a choir at a funeral, and it just gets bigger. And it's just an immersive, emotional thing. And everything in your system is running. All your subs are getting tested. Everything is going, but you are focused on the action on the screen. It doesn't take you away. And that's the hardest part of doing this, is the second it takes you out of what the director's emotional intent was, I don't think that the job was done correctly. So those are two examples that I use. And I think, Gary, you have an example of a couple of movies that you like to talk about for that too as well, right?
when you mentioned that how it grew and it surrounded us, there's a scene in the film Pleasantville, which is basically black and white, and things slowly become color, and so it's a tremendous vehicle for sound, going from narrow and mono to spread around. But there's a scene where they're driving through a park, and on the 1948 Chevy convertible, on the radio is Etta James singing "At Last," which is one of the most beautiful classics that there is, right? And as they're driving, things are starting to the trees are starting to turn color and blah blah blah, and then you see a blue, the grass is gray color, but the lake is blue, and things are starting to come color and alive. And as Etta James is singing, it goes from that narrow radio speaker to a fuller range, and then out to sort of a stereo effect. But we overdubbed an orchestra in 5.1. And eventually, by the time they get to the park and everything's in color, Etta James singing her soul out, and it's with a full orchestra backing her up in 5.1. And it just takes your heart is just pounding. It's the mere fact that you were able to grow and experience that along with the visual and made it all work, and it is so tastefully done.
Yeah, and one thing I like about using music for these multi-channel things is it shows a lot of times people think I need the 20 speakers are there for gunshots and cannon shots. Like I have a go-to one from Ready Player One, that first race, and if you just want to hear King Kong run by you and Godzilla scream, and and you want to show the craziness of having multi-channel and the chaos and the how I can pull you into an action scene, it's a great demo. But if I play that for a lot of people, it's too much. My wife looks at it and says, "Oh my God, it's too much like a roller coaster. I don't want that." But then if I do something like this Never Enough track and we play it at a trade show, everybody gets it, even the person that is into explosions and stuff, and that person doesn't think they want multi-channel and they don't think they need 10,000 watts in their house. When I play that for you, no one has ever walked out of that room and says, "I don't get it." So I do like the music because it actually allows you to do that. So that's a good one. So John, is there any good multi-channel tracks that you can think of that from a music perspective that you really like?
My gosh, there's a leading question. A software company I worked for back in the day, we did Dolby digital and PL in software. It was the first time you could actually do Dolby encoding in a computer. And then that worked fine and everything else. And then there's this new format out called DVD audio. And DVD audio is basically a multi-format audio-based format that you could play high resolution 24-bit 96K audio in surround, or you could play MP3s. You could line everything up and just play them in order. I did a demo disc actually called the Resolution Project that took the same electrical signal in surround and recorded it in lots of different formats. And it's fairly amazing. And so for a while, we were getting a lot of discs from the labels that had done surround mixes of classic albums, which is how I know of what I speak, because there's a couple of albums that were astonishing. I know the Metallica Black album in surround is really, really great. Bare Naked Ladies are very funny. They do some very funny effects with the surrounds that feed right from their sense of humor. The best one, in my opinion, was Yes's Roundabout. That's an amazing surround mix. You're not in the band, but it's wrapped around you in a kind of a U shape. And there's enough stuff going on that they can do that. But I guess my least favorite was Neil Young's Harvest, where the drums were stereo between left rear and left front. And as a drummer, I fell out of my chair. I actually called the engineer and I said, "Why did you do it that way? It just makes my teeth grate." He said, well, that's the way they were set up in the studio. And I thought, don't do reality, do the illusion of reality. So again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You should really use some taste. You should present the stuff with a sense of how the original mix was. Some groups did record in original surround. They recorded with 5 microphones, and the results are fairly amazing, but don't overuse it. Or if you're going to use it sparingly.
Yeah, and that's the main point I want to get across. Don't yell at Jeff if there's not stuff whizzing around the room. Audyssey did not mess it up. Don't yell at me or Frederick or Jim or Glenn because there's not stuff flying around in every movie you want. We're trying to create the artist's intent, and there's a reason when they use their subs. There's a when they use their surrounds. There's a reason when the LFE light comes on. It's not supposed to be on all the time. You don't need bass for everything. So LFE doesn't play all the time. So don't call me saying your subwoofer is not playing because you're watching a love story and the only time it happened is when a truck drove by, 2 hours into the movie. Okay. There's the Jeff's job at Audyssey, our job at Sound United, and Glenn's job when it comes to things like DTS and IMAX is to take what John and Gary just did and give you that experience. There's perfection and there's preference. Our goal is to give it to you as close to what the artist intended you to have as possible. Your preference may be more. And that's why we have things like our channel offsets and things that Jim can talk about, and you can go in and there's adjustments for that Audyssey has available, and there's Neural X that IMAX and Xperi provides you, and DTS provides you. That allows you to take first we give you a reference, and then we give you the ability to tweak it to make it what you want. But don't call me when I give it to you the way the director intended for you to hear it and complain about it, okay? Because that happens all the time. So Frederick popped up.
I'm hoping we can hear from these guys just a little bit about how we know what we're giving them is what they intended, or how we know what we're giving consumers is what they intended, and what reference is.
That's a difficult one for you guys because if you're not in our sort of frame of reference, acoustically space to reference, then you really don't know. And for what it's worth, you have all these options. Phil, you mentioned that you have options to be able to change things and whatnot. It's like people have also options to adjust the color tint on their screen and all that sort of stuff visually. Rarely does that ever happen. They have their television set up or their monitor set up, and rarely do they ever touch picture. But boy, does everybody ever like to twiddle with the sound and drive me crazy,
Well, I mean, the treble and bass controls on the early receivers. You'd play a Stones record and there's just not enough bass for me. I'm just going to turn the bass up. Stones aren't upset. You bought the record. It's fine. Do what you want with it.
I have noticed that immersive music and immersive film sound seems to have used more Auro 3D in the past, but that seems to have changed. Is there a sound mixing reason for this?
I don't think so. I think it's education, it's style. I think when these sort of immersive technologies first came out, people overused it. They went nuts, and they started to educate themselves and realize that a little goes a long way.
From my experience, it seems like in the theater, Auro 3D is massive. When you go all the way through the end to the end of the movie and read all the credits, there's almost always an Auro 3D logo, right? But in the home, at least in North America, Auro 3D is almost non-existent. Although in other parts of the world, I think it's very popular. But do you mix specifically in Atmos, or do you mix in hopefully DTSX, or do you mix in Auro 3D, or does it depend on the director, or how does that work?
It depends on what the distributor is asked for, and if it's all 3 formats, we'll do an initial pass in one particular format, and then we'll simply make quick individual passes for the other formats.
So does that depend on where the movie is going to actually have its theatrical run?
Yeah, the distributor has a lot to say in what they want for their audience, for their market.
Depending on the theaters, what the theaters are
Depending on
equipped with?
also depending on what country, what culture, what people are used to. Believe me, I mix all over the world at this point, and I can tell you that styles and sensitivity and of how stuff sounds is grossly different in different countries. I can tell you when I come into a different, if I go to China, for instance, their sensibility of what something should sound like is completely different. And also, there's another factor that is involved in that, and that is in different languages, you have to hear different parts of the words. So, for instance, in American, in English, we will push and chase through the back end of a sentence so that it becomes grand at the end of the sentence and it's big. And so we'll come up through the back end of a sentence, somebody speaking, and you can't do that in Japanese or in Chinese because the subject matter is at the end of the sentence, not the beginning of the sentence. And so you have to actually pull that back and then wait for that to be said and then come forward. You see what I'm saying? So it's a different style for different theatrical territories.
We're going to actually have to have you guys come back for part two.
One more question, Bill.
Okay.
One more.
Yes.
And this is an interesting one for Gary. Do you prefer sync sound, or do you prefer the actors coming into the studio to do ADR?
Production in America or North America, we use production sound as much as possible. 90% on an average would be production sound. I prefer production sound. I like the emotion and the heart and the intention with the chest and whatnot. I find that ADR, using ADR can, unless you match it perfectly, which is an art of its own, but otherwise it takes you out. Now, when I go to Moscow or if I go to Bulgaria, and mix there, they have, I would say 98% just all ADR. It's already voiced. And you have to do a lot of create space and perspective and, whatever. But to me, having done both quite a bit, using production sound is infinitely more effective, and it produces the emotional pull that you really need.
So, guys, I'd like to thank you guys for coming. Hopefully, Gary, you'll want to come back. John's a regular, Jeff's a regular, Glenn's a regular. So hopefully, I think you enjoyed this and you'd want to come back and hang out with our group again. And we'd like to thank the Sound United training team.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. Oh, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. You guys are fascinating. And I'd like to thank the Sound United training team for pulling this off. And of course, all of our partners. So thank you guys again for coming. And hopefully you got something from this session, everybody out there in the audience. And take care, and we will talk to you soon.